Those were my concerns. I thought you asked if anybody wanted to say anything.
I did.
Okay,
Okay.
so those were my concerns. If
Okay.
that's gonna be fenced, is there, what does this look like? You know, right now it's just a piece of paper and somebody's asking for something.
Okay. We have lots of pictures. Okay. Does anyone else wish to address the commission? Look for a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Apula.
Thanks, Mayor. So we'll start out, this item was tabled at the last meeting, so it's before us again for approval of a CSM and the building and site plan, and then he is also requesting a conditional use grant approval for warehousing so that he can have storage on the property for each of the units. So if you recall from last month, the CSM will create 3 lots. The first lot is 4.24 acres. The second lot, lot 2, is 1.59 acres, and that is where his development will be going. And then lot 3 is the remainder of the business park, which is 57.24 acres. Staff does recommend approval of the CSM. It meets all the requirements of the B5 zoning district. So here is a revised site plan. He is proposing 4 buildings. It's a reduction from the original 5 buildings, and this is to avoid a requirement for a stormwater management plan. And we can talk more about that later. Engineering is here to answer any questions. There is room for expansion on this site, and the applicant has indicated that he is interested in potentially expanding the site once a stormwater management plan is completed for the entire business park. He is proposing 2 units per building, so there will be a total of 8 units and 4 parking stalls per 2 parking stalls per unit. Which right now we don't know the exact users of the properties, and parking is determined by use, so that will be determined on a case-by-case basis. So the applicant met with Commissioner Schaefer regarding the design of the buildings, and these are the plans that he came up with after that discussion. This is building A. This is the buildings that face Baldav Avenue. This is the facade that faces Baldav, and then this is the front elevation of all the buildings which face the interior parking and drive area. And this is just building B. The other 2 western buildings that don't face Baldav, they won't have that brick wall. After seeing the revised plan, staff is recommending additional, staff has additional recommendations to the design. We are recommending that for all of the front elevations that there be a different alternative material incorporated into the gable section. We had recommended a faux cedar shake siding in this area to break it apart from the rest of the facade. We are also recommending a horizontal band of some sort to kind of differentiate the gable from the rest of the building. If you notice from the previous elevations, they are carrying the brick all the way up the height of the garage doors. And then on the Baldav elevation, he did add this bump out, and the entirety of it would be brick on the exterior. And we are also recommending that this gable be an alternative material with the horizontal band. We are also recommending awnings above each of the doors, and the applicant has requested, he did not show this on the previous plan, but he had added a door on this front facade. He asked to have that on the Baldav facing facade. Staff is supportive of that. All the other doors are on the side facades, and the elevation would look like this with windows on each side. We are also recommending that all the windows be the same size. And so we had recommended the cedar shake look-alike, or the cedar pattern siding material for the gables. The applicant is asking that the Planning Commission consider vertical siding in this area instead. So I have images here. I don't know if you guys can really see the difference. So this is the cedar shake siding. This is what he would like to be considered instead. Staff will leave it up to the commission to see what they think is most appropriate. And then the lighting and landscaping plan is not changed. He's just proposing 8 wall lights and 8 wall packs. He does have to update his lighting plan to reflect the correct number of lights. There's a note on the plan that he needs to be corrected, and then he needs to submit full cutoff sheets for the proposed light packs. He is removing a street tree as he previously did on the landscape plan. He does indicate that there is a dense landscaping buffer between his property and the residential properties to the west. We are requesting that that be shown, the species and type be shown on a revised landscaping plan to determine if additional screening is required. And then he is requesting a conditional use to allow for storage for all of the units. He has indicated, based upon online polls and users at his other developments, that roughly 51% of the users are for small businesses, 31 is workshop use for business and personal purposes, and 18% of the users are for storage, both business and personal. At this time, we don't know which users will be occupying each of the 8 units. We will be determining that on a case-by-case basis. He just wants the storage conditional use so that since 18% of the users do use it for storage, so that they don't have to come back through the conditional use process to use their unit for storage. We do have other uses that are permitted in the B5 zoning district, and then uses that may be considered, which are still a conditional use, that would have to come back to the planning commission at a later date if it doesn't fall under storage. We did contact other communities who have these types of locations in their community. Of the ones that responded, they did not indicate any knowledge of complaints to their department or any police department calls. 2 of the communities that responded said that these uses were under permitted uses in their manufacturing or industrial zoning districts. And then 1 community, it was a conditional use, and they did create a specific category for this use because they didn't really have a category that fit this type of use. So with that, staff is recommending approval of the CSM, the building and site plan subject to the changes in your report, and the conditional use grant subject to the conditions in your report. There will be no outdoor storage allowed. That is one of the conditions of the report.
Okay, thank you. I'll go to Mr. Thompson, and you have anything that you'd like to add?
Not really. I think she said it effectively. I'm here to answer questions. I know we talked briefly about it last time. Just a couple notes. Parking in general is typically, it's never really an issue because we have, if you went by the general guidelines for office, it's 1 stall per 200 or 300 square feet or something like that. And then generally speaking, for warehouse space, it's 1 for an employee or I can't remember how many square feet that is, but generally speaking, 2 stalls per unit is pretty good, and we never have issues with parking. So, my apologies. The landscape plan, if you can put that back out, I just didn't get around to fixing that part of it, but you can see if you put the building over where those 3 pine trees are, the 2 on the, and then we'll probably just leave that. The landscape architect will prepare something for that, but that's the general area where there could be possible expansion to the south. So I don't. But that'll come later. As you know, these sites or this particular use, although it seems somewhat different, it's really not. It's just simple office warehouse space, flex space. It's just kind of packaged a little differently, and we typically find, because it's small space, and people can purchase these, and so you get people that don't have enough room in their garage, and they want some other space. So I think that's why, but they're hard to locate. You can't put them in residential areas. You can't. So it's generally speaking, it's industrial parks, and so that's, and it's not going to be in an industrial park or a business park that has lots of deed restrictions, and you're attracting, the higher end businesses, generally bigger businesses with bigger buildings. So this particular site has been sitting vacant for a number of years, and I just think it would be a nice fit back there, and I don't think it'd be affecting anything. So, other than that, I can answer questions.
Commissioners, comments, questions? Architect Schaefer.
Hi, I met with the applicant, and as you suggested, we made some changes. In addition, staff recommended that we take the gable ends and put either shingles up there, hardy plank shingles or some other type of shingles, or the applicant suggested vertical siding. I guess I would prefer shingles, except that particular brand, Louisiana Pacific. Their shingles they're staggered on the bottom and they look kind of rustic. If you use another brand where they're straight on the bottom, I would prefer that, or I don't really have any objection to board and batten siding in that gable end.
You wouldn't have an
No, I
objection to that?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't know how the staff feels about it or the other commissioners, but
I'd prefer the board and batten just because I think it's more durable. So, in my personal opinion, but
well, I'm prejudiced. I have that on my garage. It works well. The other thing, both Marty and I agree that we do not favor those blinds, or not blinds.
The awnings?
The awnings over the doors. I think it just sort of mess it up. If you need it, I thought there was enough going on there. You didn't need those.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Other than that, it's fine.
Okay. Mr. Parrish.
Yeah, thanks for coming back this month. Appreciate you being flexible and modifying your plan. I think it's an attractive building. Also wanted to thank Commissioner Schaefer for taking time out of your schedule to work with the applicant.
Do you have a motion? Mr. Stonker.
I would make a motion to approve per staff's recommendations, excluding the awnings at the windows and allowing for the applicant to use board and batten if he so chooses versus a hardy shingle.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
Wish you luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to regular business, we have MSI General for Charter Manufacturing. The applicant is seeking building and site plan approval for a 7,565 square foot building for the property located at 1212 West Glen Oaks Lane.
So the proposed building will replace the building that was damaged by fire, which has been taken down, and the use of the building as offices for Charter Manufacturing will not change. As stated, the previous building area was 7,878. They have reduced that a little bit to 7,565 square feet. They are removing, as shown on the site plan, a parking area that was directly east of the building. The parking requirement based on the use calculates out to 38 spaces. And with the removal of this parking area, they are proposing 33 parking spaces, so a parking waiver is required. The applicant has indicated that they have approximately 12 employees at full staff with occasional events for up to 25 people. So based on those numbers, staff is supportive of the parking waiver. And in addition, the site has room to expand parking if that demand changes in the future. So the building replicates the previous building with similar placement of pillars and dormers and roof lines. There are aluminum clad windows on all elevations. They have the entrance where the existing one was, and they are proposing a second entrance on the south elevation. And then on the north elevation, the rear of the building, they are proposing two doors on that elevation. The overall building height is 32 feet, which meets the requirements. They are proposing on the east elevation 2 wall-mounted exit lights. As a condition of approval, the applicant will have to submit dispersion plan and cut sheets for those. They are making some changes to the landscape plan. On the site plan that was shown above, they are extending the driveway to the north. That'll require the removal of existing birch, and they will be replacing those with 4 serviceberry trees. They are removing ash trees that are on the site on the east elevation, and they will be providing 4 new shade trees. There will be additional landscaping to cap the southeast corner of the property, and additional landscaping at the base of the west elevation. Staff is recommending 3 street trees along the existing sidewalk. Those should be placed at one every 30 feet, and all trees on the site shall have a minimum 3-inch caliber. They are also proposing a retaining wall to the north of this new drive, and staff will need to approve those after they see detailed plans. And with that, staff is recommending approval of the building and site plan amendment, subject to the conditions in the report.
Thank you, Bipula. Go to the applicant. You have anything you wish to add?
Sure. John Coots and Jim Olson here on behalf of Charter Manufacturing. We're both with MSI General. We agree with all the comments from the staff, and we're working hard to continue to address some of the additional requests that they made. We have no issues with it. Obviously, this was a building that burned down about 6 months ago, and so we've been working hard with Charter to come up with a rebuild plan that improves on what was there and meets the current needs that they want to use the building for now. So really any questions that anybody has, we'd be happy to answer, but we have no issues with the report or the feedback we've gotten from staff.
Okay, thank you. We're glad you're rebuilding, and the building looks very nice. Any comments from commissioners?
Yeah. I'm curious, I might have been out of town. What caused the fire? Was it lightning?
No, the original building, there was a faulty wiring and an exhaust fan that started the fire.
Okay.
So
there, in the new design, there was no dramatic changes that would have, you know.
well, the new building will be sprinklered. The old one wasn't, so
Okay.
that should help.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. No, looks great.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve, subject to staff recommendations. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimous, passes. Think you look forward to it. Thank you. The next item on our agenda, Sean Keeson for Capco Park. That item has been withdrawn. So we move on to John Franceschi for the PJL Group. The applicant is seeking building and site plan amendment approval for exterior renovations for the property located at 10620 Northport Washington Road.
Thanks, Mayor. So a lot of people know the building as the Marathon 1 building, and if you guys recall, in January we approved building plan amendment to the building directly east, the Gao Medical Office building. So now PJL is before us for changes to their building. What they're proposing is replacing the existing materials with a burgundy brick, and we do have samples here. The rest of the building will be a siding and a proposed cobblestone color. If you guys recall, the Gao Medical Building was approved with a tan siding at a 6-inch reveal, and then a brown standing seam metal roof. The burgundy brick color does match the existing area and the existing materials of buildings nearby. And the proposed siding color is an earth tone, which also matches the other buildings in the area. For the Gao Medical Office Building, the commission did require that the areas at the slope surfaces by the windows be a similar material or color as the siding for that building, and here the applicant is proposing to use the same siding that they're using on the exterior. And then again, the trim will match the existing brick on the proposed brick, and the roof will be a charcoal gray black color. Staff recommends approval of the building plan based on the conditions in the report. And Robin, there's a better color elevation up here as well. We can pass that around too.
Okay, let me go to the applicant. I just want to point out there's only 2 staff conditions here. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. Uh, So you've done a fantastic job. So do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, except that, the building was built back in '84, and we kind of feel that it's a little dated, a little bit out of place, and we just wanted to kind of update the design a little bit, make it a little bit more classic, a little bit more timeless, so it kind of fits in with the other buildings, especially to the south, Concord's buildings to the south, and the other buildings in the surrounding area.
Yeah, it's great that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
I'd make a motion to, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I want to make couple of comments. I like the brick, but there's no brick there now. Are you going to use thin brick? Is that
No, we're using the standard bricks.
standard brick? Well, how do you support that?
We're going to put a foundation.
Are you going to put a new foundation in? Okay. The second thing is below the windows, there's like a 45-degree slope. I don't really think you can use hardy plank there. That won't hold up. You really should use standing seam metal roof, and that's what we did on the other building, and I'd recommend you do that there too.
Yeah, that was something we were just talking about this week about that.
Okay.
So, but that's a good idea.
Other than that, I think it's great.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay.
All right, motion to approve.
Second.
Motion and second to approve, subject to staff conditions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Moving on to policy items, we have Chapter 58 of the zoning code as it relates to off-street parking requirements.
Thank you, Mayor. We are in the beginning stages of looking at modifications to our off-street parking requirements. And while there's been a lot of discussion about the town center and the parking on our civic campus, this goes a little bit beyond that as well. Since last changes that were made to our parking requirements date prior to 2001, and at that time there's been a lot of changes with the commercial marketplace and other things like workplace patterns of behavior and automobile usage. Our current code allows Planning Commission to require less or more parking than the code dictates, and staff feels that that flexibility is a good thing, but we felt that more precise land use categories would be helpful in guiding applicants and developers in the future to understand what the code is going to require as part of their process. In addition to the use classifications, we're looking at a number of different other metrics that we look at in terms of parking, in terms of setbacks, landscaping, the physical dimensions. I've also included in the report a number of different waivers that the Commission has granted over the last several years, and with that I provided some examples of some of the developments. Offsets, this is probably one of the more common requests that have been granted in the past, that we typically require a 20-foot side yard offset in the B2, B3, and B4 zoning districts. We typically have waived those in the past for projects where there are substandard lot sizes. Examples include the Taco Bell Jimmy John's building, as well as the Village Vet project on Port Washington Road. Again, both of these were budding commercial uses, and they had substandard lot sizes to begin with, so there was a space issue in terms of providing that 20-foot side yard. We've also granted limited grant to the 25-foot front setback. This is one of these kind of quirks in our code where the Planning Commission has authority to grant the offset in the code, but it does not have the authority to grant the setback per the code. So the only way that setback can be granted is through a conditional use grant. So we have addressed that with some of the conditional use grants, including the PNC Bank, the Les Moise, and the Starbucks Caldwell Banker. These were all conditional uses that took advantage of the conditional use process to ask for a setback variation from the 25 feet. Number of required stalls, we've granted a number of those. I think the most extreme one I addressed in the code was the Metro Market grocery store. At the time, they were required per our code 600 spaces. They only felt 358 were necessary, and we granted a waiver to that number. I think even after a number of years of the grocery store being in operation, that probably is still a conservative number. Other examples include, typically this has come up a lot with some of the memory care and other assisted living facility uses. Everything in our code right now falls under elderly housing, which is probably a higher standard than what we need for assisted living or memory care or other types of uses. So we'll look at, again, further defining some of those uses, as well as looking at how we actually require parking. The current code requires parking stalls based on square footage and number of employees. I know there's been discussion about why we look at number of employees instead of just a straight square footage number, and we'll look at that as we go forward. There is the IT standard, which does base it, and if you recall, the parking study that was done for the Foxtown development used the IT standard for that development, and that's strictly based on square footage. The downside of using just the ITE is number of the uses they look at. They have very small sample sizes. They may look at only 5 different developments over the country that have that specific use and studied what type of parking demand. So it's not error-proof or foolproof by any means. There is some variation to what that code will allow in terms of its numbers. Stall and aisle dimensions. Our code right now still requires a 10-foot minimum parking stall width, and I believe most cases we've reduced that to 9 feet. I think the only time I can recall a debate on that issue was with the Metro Market, where I think I was at the council, or some of the council members felt that 10 foot would have been more adequate there because of the amount of trips and the groceries being loaded in the cars and things like that, but ultimately it was still approved at 9 feet. Other requests that we've granted in the past have been for the two-way traffic requirement of 25 feet. The most recent one I could think of was the Freighter Medical Clinic. Some of the non-main aisles were allowed to be reduced to 24 feet in width. Another one that comes up on occasion is the interior lot landscaping requirement, the 10%. Now, this is a landscaping requirement, but it does impact the size of the parking lot. One of the larger developments that we had where this was waived was the Ozaki Ice Center. They were trying to meet a larger number of on-site parking spaces for their bigger events like the Homestead Cedarburg hockey game, so they were allowed to reduce that interior landscaping line, I think by half. I think it was 5%. We also have allowed other waivers to that requirement for smaller parking lots, and I know there was a discussion at our Christ Church where they requested a waiver to that a few months ago. So at this point, we're looking for some direction from the commission on if there's any issues that you'd like to see addressed as part of this. Some things you feel are adequate, some things you are not adequate, and we'll keep working and plugging away with some updated samples. We'll give you some updated parking lot. I was going to provide you some pictures, but the snow came on Friday. That kind of put that to an end. So we'll in the next meeting we'll have some pictures of some of these parking lots to show what some of this looks like, and we can talk further about anything that you'd like to see or would not like to see going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Commissioner Worth?
2 items. One is the 10-foot or 9-foot stall. If what we're approving is 9 feet on an almost uniform basis, is there any reason to leave the 10-foot in the code? Doesn't it simply provide a message to some people that's inaccurate?
Yeah, I believe that's one of the pretty simple ones we can change. I mean, the only time that I think 10-foot is warranted is probably on larger big box developments, which we don't see here in Mequon. So I don't think that we need to keep the 10-foot in there. If we do happen to approve something of a larger scale like that, typically it's going to be through a PUD. And through the PUD.
Why is that more appropriate on the, I mean, granted, the new IKEA store is twice the size of Metro Mart, but Metro Mart's a pretty big store anyhow, and the 9-foot stalls work well there. So what are the circumstances
well, I think
under
the
which you'd
9-foot,
want the 10?
The reason that 9-foot came up with Metro Market, and I think it comes up with a lot of the larger big box stores, is just the amount of inventory you're taking from the store into your cars. If people are trying to load up their back seats, they're opening doors, they're putting larger pieces of furniture or things like that in those seats. You like to have more room on each side of the car so you can open them up. I think that's one issue. The other issue is just the amount of traffic that are in and out of those stores, the volume that comes in and out of there. It may be warranted to have larger stalls in there for allow people to have a little bit more safer exiting and entering. Most of the time I've seen those have been in like big box, like Costco has very large parking stalls with the side buffers with the 2-foot striping. And I think that's the main intent.
Could the code have something that says, building's, you know, it's a 9-foot stall unless the building's over 90,000 square feet, and then it'll be determined by the planning commission or something.
Sure, yeah,
along
we can, again, we can look at that type of regulation.
And the other is the interior lot landscaping. Now, it's a wonderful idea when it works, but particularly on smaller properties, it ends up looking silly. And if the actual interior lot islands aren't big enough, all you end up with is a lot of dead stuff that gets replaced every year, costing a bunch of money, and it never looks that great. I mean, show me where we have, you know, we have a lot of trees planted in the parking lots. Show me where we have really nice-looking mature trees, because I don't think they ever get that way when they're on landscape islands that are 3 feet wide. So or whatever, you know, 4 feet wide. I think somewhere, I mean, it's a great concept, but what ends up happening, everything ends up dead in the winter or gets run over by plows. I wish there was some guidelines to make it both workable and practical, while at the same time.
Yeah, and I think there
Provide what
can
we
be, we've looked at some other examples, and, you know, instead of going just with a straight percentage, you can look at it on a per stall basis or where they have to be located. Some codes will require that you have to have basically end cap islands on each end of the parking lot with landscaping, and dictate that, and it's got to be a certain width. Typically, they'll say it has to be the width of a stall, so you'd have a 9-foot area so that trees can grow and survive. You know, it is difficult even on our end for the 10% because it's very difficult to calculate, so we're relying on a developer to calculate that for us. So there are other options I think we can definitely look at if that's one of the things you want to look at, and maybe take a different approach to determining how we can still have trees within the parking lot without having it just so formulaic.
Something, I mean, I like the concept. I just think in practice it often ends up being a cost without the benefit we want. And so maybe, you know, to look at how do you make this actually work better than what we have.
We don't dictate curbed landscape islands, do we?
Well, we had, and I don't know, probably the mayor and Alderman Worth probably remember this, back in about 10 years ago, we had a proposed landscaping code that had failed at the Common Council. That did dictate curbed islands, and we did try to add that as a condition for a number of years, and since that code has never been adopted and we're looking at changes to that as well, we've stopped requiring that as a condition.
I mean, the curbs obviously would prevent people from driving over the islands, but then again, you know, over time, the plows hit them, break them apart, they cost more. I understand why we don't do it, but, yeah.
Like John said, the landscaping ends up being spread out so much in narrow little bands that it really doesn't add much to the parking lot aesthetically. It's almost better if you took 10% of the space and set it aside, maybe in 2 groups over here or over there. And so you actually had an opportunity to create some interesting landscaping that was a part of the parking lot, but it was in all one area. That
Yeah.
might be an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 things that we have to look at. One is the benefit of it is also to provide, in a number of years, the shading requirements that we have, so.
It's never get that big.
Yeah, I was gonna say, show us where it's worked.
Well, we'll
The
have to
tree
look at
gets
some,
that big, they cut it down.
yeah.
Yes.
Or it dies. It dies. I mean,
Is it-
trees are not meant to be grown surrounded by
cement.
concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hard-packed dirt on top. I mean, it's just not it's not a great environment for the tree.
It never looks good.
Well, we can look at some examples of different projects throughout the state that maybe have shown to be successful in different methodologies to
great.
how they accomplish that, so.
Again, I like the concept, just the results haven't really borne fruit.
Any other comments? Bring us back what you think we should do.
Alrighty,
All right.
sounds good.
Move right on to the next one. An ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to filling, excavation, and berms.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a revision to sections 673, 564, and 603 that all relate to filling, excavating, and berms. The changes to all three sections essentially move the language from the ordinance into the standard specifications for land development, specifically Chapter 7. So in your packets, you have not only the revised clean ordinance language, you have the marked up version, Chapter 7, the revised permit and permit instructions, which end up being a lot of information. This whole packet also went to the Public Works Committee last month, and they reviewed it in depth for all of the various pieces to make sure that each piece that was going out of the ordinance had a place in Chapter 7 or in the permit application, so that the regulations were still in place and that they weren't duplicated in multiple locations.
Commissioner Worth.
What's the benefit of taking them out of the ordinance?
Clarity is the biggest part. There were a lot of duplications.
No, I understood that. But
so
why not have the regulations be in an ordinance?
So the regulation is still in the ordinance, the specifics of the regulations, so what's required on the plans, what's all of the details of that regulation are moved to the standard specifications for land development.
But why aren't the standard specifications for land development an ordinance?
Because there's a significant amount of pages. I think we're up to about 200 pages of our land development ordinance, our standard specifications for land development. So it would be very cumbersome to make that all in ordinance, and then each time we were to change something in the standard specifications for land development, we're now changing all of the ordinances. So historically, we've changed our standard specifications, some sections of it, every 2 years. So technology changes, standards changes, things evolve. Having it as a standard specification gives the staff the ability to make those minor changes without having to go through the ordinance changing process.
But then aren't you also able to change the policies that we're taking out of, that at some point somebody thought was good to have as a firm policy?
And those items, the policy-related items, what you have to do for each various piece are still in the ordinance. It's the details of what is on this plan sheet and the specifics that are moved to the land development specs.
Okay. Are these on the website?
The land development specs or
Yes.
the... Yes.
Okay. So that somebody could actually find them, because I have trouble finding things on the website.
It's better than it used to be.
Well, it is.
They are under the engineering division.
Okay.
Commissioner Stoker, have any comments? Because I know you deal with this.
Inherently, you're really not changing what I would need to do to request, whether I need to request a fill permit or not. So you haven't changed that.
Correct.
That's another conversation.
So we've had, we did add some clarifications in there in that a property owner who is mulching their yard would not require a fill permit. We have made it a little bit more clear how you go through the process, so that when developers come in, that it's a little bit easier for them to follow the procedure. So things like what happens if I'm exporting 1,000 cubic yards? What is the practice? So that's defined in the instructions for the permit, so that they know that they have to come to Planning Commission for approval for anything over that 1,000 cubic yards mark.
And that's the part that I struggle with. It's an absurdly low number, something that Mequon historically did not enforce. For the first 11 years that I built homes here, it was never enforced. I never paid a permit fee. We have new engineering people, now they're catching that, and we're paying, I'll pay the fee, but it's to have to come in front of Planning Commission for 1,300 yards of fill on a 3.2 acre lot is absurd to me. That's the other part of the conversation. That's what I was really trying to ask. Again, that's not addressed in this. I think that's a whole nother topic, so.
So the good news is that anything that would have to come to Planning Commission, you're not paying two fees. You're only paying the one Planning Commission fee. So that's at least something.
What you have to understand, you use the word developer loosely. When you're a single-family home builder, they're not a lot of them are not builders. They're not thinking through that process. I get if someone wants to bring in 42,000 or whatever number it is. But again, the other thing is well, never mind. Again, another topic.
But it's a good topic to have, and it is germane because it's in this ordinance, right? I mean, so we could have that discussion. I mean, part of where this came about was, and I can think of two, wasn't actually developers and it wasn't actually home builders, but it were people who built absurd berms that got at least one or two aldermen and their neighborhoods bent out of shape and tried to make it more insistent that there get some approval, including one on Mequon Road in Solar Heights. It seems to me that there could be a calculation though, that if you're not adjusting the differential in the soil level by more than some number, or that you're not, if it's 1,000, if you're going to put 1,000 cubic yards in a tiny front yard out of a home, is different than putting 1,000 cubic yards in a 3.5 acre lot. And maybe there's a way to, because it is silly that comes to the council or to the planning commission.
Well, I would agree with that, and the frustrating part is where we're holding a house up 2 feet to accommodate a grading situation, which is going to require 2,000 yards. From an engineering perspective, we have to provide you a grading plan that shows that it's going to work. So who cares if it's 1,000 or if it's 2,000 yards that I need to bring in to make it work? That's the frustrating part. But let me give you another example right now. Highgate subdivision, lot number 5. It's a lot that I had an accepted offer on, was going to build my home. Come to find out that I was going to need to bring in, and I forget the number, I was going to need to hold the house up 8 feet, much like the large house that's on lot number 4. The whole house had to be held up 8 feet because there was water 12 inches down. So I have customers coming to me now saying, should I buy this lot? And my answer to them is, I would struggle recommending, because you can buy this lot. What if the planning commission doesn't approve you bringing in the 60,000 or 200,000 yards of fill that's going to be required to do it? So now you own a piece of property that you can't sell. And unfortunately, there's an owner of that property right now that's probably struggling to sell the lot because it's the cart in front of the horse situation. I can't, as a builder,
Well, they could
recommend.
put a contingency in the offer, couldn't they?
What's that?
They could put that as a contingency in the offer.
You could, which would make sense, but now from a planning standpoint, how much testing, it just complicates matters. And I've talked to Jack about this, and Jack said, it would definitely be approved, the neighbor, but that's what this planning commission, what if the planning commission changes and people say, no, we don't want to bring in, and that's a lot that, you cannot build a home on that lot without holding the house up. You go down 14 inches, you're in the water. You have to stay above the water table. There's no way to do it. So to me, again, and by the way, that's a 5 acre lot. You could bring in 1 million cubic yards there, and it's not going to adversely affect anything else. Look at the way the house is to the left. That's what it's going to look like when it's done. I agree that you have to make the grading work. Engineering says, yeah, the grading's going to work great. Who cares if I'm bringing in 1,000 or 50,000? And if you want us to pay a fee for the 50,000, let's pay the fee. But don't make us come in front of the planning commission. Ultimately, you guys are the ones telling us whether it's going to work or not. And if you're agreeing that it's going to work, who cares how much fill it is? That's my question.
And losing one fee is a smaller cost than having to take the time to come to a meeting. There's a cost in that. We ignore that too often.
So again, that's where my frustration is. And it doesn't take much manipulation of a home to need 500 or 1,000 yards, a foot, 18 inches. All of a sudden, you start needing dirt quickly. There's ways around it. We can start dropping garages and things like that, but homeowners don't want 5 steps from their garage into the house. So that's not what homeowners want. And again, I'm not saying this happens in every situation, but I'll bet you at least 10% of the homes I'm building now in Mequon, maybe 20, I should really be applying for a permit. Now, maybe I'm fudging the numbers and saying I'm at 999.75 yards, but
is there a way to, can you, when you come back, although this is going to the council, isn't it?
Well, that depends on what you guys determine. Before we move on, to what Commissioner Stoker was saying, the engineering review process is the same, whether it is 200 cubic yards or 2,000 cubic yards. We are still reviewing to make sure that the drainage works, the grading works. It just is whether or not it comes to you guys at the 1,000 cubic yard mark.
Is there a way to craft the ordinance, since I haven't given this any thought, I don't have a way off the top of my head, to satisfy the concerns that where this has been a concern, and there are a couple of instances that really prompted this to always come back to the Planning Commission, without making it the norm it has to come here, and you know, let it be done on a staff level unless, you know, and maybe that house isn't the best example, because maybe, I don't know, that it'd be hard to craft around that one because that's a lot of fill for a small area, but maybe there's still a way to do it. I would just think if we can avoid having it to come to the Planning Commission and it's just part of your process, except for when somebody wants to put an 8-foot wall butting up to a major road, you know, which is kind of what somebody did. I don't know if it's 8 feet or 6 feet or whatever it is. Maybe there's a way to do that. Does it need to be here, or can we amend this ordinance? Again, is there any time sensitivity to getting this done?
There isn't.
Well, then I might think we push this off and ask you to come back with a suggestion. That would be my suggestion.
It would be, my thoughts are exactly the same. If you are going to approve the grading plan, whether it be 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 yards, so long as I'm not trying to berm and have a 6-foot hill, if you're gonna approve the grading plan, to me, it shouldn't matter. Again, we as builders are always trying to manage water. We can't dump water into the neighboring lots. We have to make it, now that Mequon's gotten more consistent in enforcing grading plans, it really should be a moot point. And that's even more frustrating, is when I'm given a grading plan and I have to build a house to match the grading plan, and it requires me to bring in 2,000 loads of fill. Why am I paying a fee for that? You already approved it at the subdivision level. Now you're gonna punish me at the individual lot level. It makes no sense. Now, I totally agree. If someone wants to come and build an 8-foot berm along Highland Road or whatever the case may be, that I think should come through here. But if it is getting approved at the engineering level for a single-family residential home, I think it's a moot point. I don't think it should ever come in front of this Planning Commission.
Has the Planning Commission ever turned anybody down?
It's created a lot of concern among residents because you know, 1,000 cubic yards sounds like a lot.
Right.
And so sometimes you get people coming here wondering what's going to happen if you bring in this fill, when in reality it's not a
But
big.
they're worried about it because they're worried it's gonna be dumping, it's gonna be forcing water, it's gonna create a water situation somewhere else. That's what the master grading plan for the subdivision is, and that's what engineering is doing, is making sure we're adhering to that. So if I'm adhering to that master grading plan, and the master grading plan's been approved, it doesn't matter if I bring in 10,000 yards, as long as I'm adhering to it.
I agree with John. I just think the subdivisions are that one situation where the homeowner bought their lot thinking that the grades were all gonna be a certain level, and, I mean, they went into it with basic assumptions, so, you know, I know 1,000 cubic yards isn't actually a lot. And, you know, so if you take away the homeowner's right to come to this meeting and at least voice their concern, I can understand how that would be an issue. But I do agree that in the end, it's not an issue as long as the engineering department is certifying that it's not gonna create a runoff problem in the long run. But, you know, if there's a substantial grade change, the homeowners in the neighborhood bought their lots in that subdivision assuming that, you know, there wasn't gonna be big berms there and huge walkout basements. I mean, they were assuming that they were assuming when they bought their lots for a planned subdivision, so.
In fairness to that particular lot that I'm referring to, I don't know that the developer realized, I don't know that the city at the time was enforcing master grading plans. I don't even know if there is a master grading plan for that subdivision. I don't believe there is. So
There isn't.
the first house that goes in there realizes there's a problem, and it's that whole side of the street. So we've got lot one where you've got a house that looks absurdly high out of the ground, but they have to. It's the only way you can build the house. You got the large house on lot 4. It's 8 feet above the grade that anyone ever envisioned it being. But unfortunately, lots 2, 3, and 5 are gonna have the same scenario. Again, to really make it look proper, you need to do what Lot 4 did, and that's tens of thousands of cubic yards of fill, tens of thousands, and it may even be into the 6 digits. You need a massive amount of fill to make it look appropriate.
Where is this subdivision?
It's on west of Wauwatosa on Highland Road on the north side.
The
about a-
northeast corner of Highland and Farmdale.
and Farmdale.
Oh, there, okay.
Yeah.
Basically a swamp.
Well, a couple of things too, just to address some of the comments. We do already have requirements for berm height. If it's over 4.5 feet, they have to come to planning commission for approval, regardless of the amount of fill that's brought in. We have entertained those in the past in terms of getting approvals. And I think the other issue is probably what Commissioner Parris says, it's really not maybe the amount, it's the deviation from either the approved grading plan or it's a deviation to the properties on each side of you that may trigger the concern from the neighbors. So that may be an approach to look at in terms of maybe not a quantity, but how much deviation we're talking about from neighboring lots or neighboring businesses.
And to, case in point, my current home that I built, first lot in on the right in Hawks Glen, I put the foundation in, every neighbor, the city got calls, oh my gosh, what are you doing? The garage is 6 feet out of the ground. This thing's gonna look like it's sitting up on a hill. Go by my house. I have less than 2% pitch on my driveway. But when I first put the house there, here's the foundation 6 feet out of the ground. Guess what? I probably brought in 10,000 cubic yards of fill. Didn't have a permit on it, as a side note. Didn't pay the permit. Anyway, my point is, neighbors don't understand it. I understand why people start getting panicky. Why is this house sticking out of the ground that much? Drive by it and look at it. There's no pitch. It is, but unfortunately, people don't understand that. And so again, my house went through the city process where they approved the grading plan. It works. We have no problem with my grading, but that's the only way my house could be built. So by virtue of the lot that I was given in the grading plan for the subdivision, it had to be built that way. Yes, I brought in 10,000 cubic yards, maybe even more than that of fill. And again, I wouldn't even care about paying for the fee. I just don't want to have to come from a planning commission. So
We're so nice.
I'd move to table this to see if we can address this issue in a way that protects interests.
Yeah, if you can keep people from needlessly coming before this body, that's a good idea. Yeah, make it simpler for them.
Let's shorten our meetings.
So we have a motion and a second to table, pending further action on staff's part, and all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That item is tabled.
Move to adjourn.
second.
Motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.